On a winter morning in the quiet town of Cedarbrook, an entire community gathered to say goodbye to a little girl everyone believed was gone forever. But there was one witness who refused to accept death. A German shepherd named Kodiak would not leave her side because he sensed something no human could feel. What if the child the town mourned was not lost at all? What if instinct and loyalty could uncover a truth buried beneath the snow? If you're watching this right now, tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss these emotional, real-life stories of faith, love, and miracles. Winter had settled over Cedarbrook like a slow, deliberate breath from the sky. Snow clung to the steep roofs and bowed the branches of the old fir trees along the narrow streets, muffling every sound until the whole town seemed to move in whispers. At the edge of town, half hidden behind a stand of bare maples, stood the small stone chapel, St. Matthew's. Its stained glass windows dimmed by frost, its bell tower wrapped in ice. Inside, the air held a faint mixture of cold incense, old wood, and wet wool from a coat shaken free of snow. It was the kind of winter day when time itself felt frozen, and Cedarbrook believed it had come together to say goodbye to a little girl. Emily Turner, 6 years old, lay in a small white coffin near the altar, surrounded by lilies that could not quite soften the cruelty of the scene. She had been a bright, slender child, with freckles scattered like light across her cheeks and hair the color of pale wheat. Her world had always been full of crayons, snow angels, and crumpled paper drawings offered shyly to adults as if they were priceless treasures. Now she was dressed in a soft blue dress, her hands folded, her lashes resting so gently on her skin that more than one person had to look away. Her mother, Sarah Turner, sat in the first pew, fingers knotted together so tightly her knuckles were white. Sarah was in her mid-30s, taller than most women in town, with a long, willowy frame that once made her look graceful, but now only made her seem breakable. Her dark hair, usually twisted into a practical bun for her job as a nurse at Cedarbrook Community Hospital, hung loose over her shoulders in a way that said she'd given up caring what she looked like. There was a quiet strength about her, the kind that came from years of night shifts and holding the hands of strangers in pain. But it had been cracked badly 3 years earlier when her husband, Mark, died in a factory accident. Since then, she had tried to build her life around Emily, pouring every last bit of softness she had into the little girl. Losing Mark had made her cautious with hope. Losing Emily seemed like it might finish the job. Her shoulders trembled, but she didn't cry loudly. Her grief was inward, tight and controlled, as if, after so much loss, she had learned that screaming never convinced the world to give anything back. Next to the coffin, pressed so close his fur brushed the wood, lay Kodiak. The German shepherd was large even for his breed, a solid, powerful male with a thick gray and black coat dusted in snow that refused to melt on his back. He was about 5 years old, in the prime of his strength, his muscles built from long patrols and training sessions. His ears were tall and sharp, his amber eyes bright and restless, darting not to the windows or the priest or the guests, but always back to Emily. Kodiak bore a faint scar on his left flank from a past operation, a white thread of memory against his darker fur. Those who knew him understood he was not just a police dog. He was the kind of animal whose entire being seemed woven around duty and quiet affection. To strangers, he looked intense, almost intimidating, but to those he trusted, he was gentle, careful with children, patient with the elderly, and always hovering near anyone who seemed fragile. He understood more than most people thought a dog could understand, and today his entire body hummed with a tension he could not express with words. Standing a few feet away from the coffin, watching Kodiak with troubled eyes, was Damon Hale. Damon was in his early 40s, with a frame that still carried the disciplined lines of a man who had spent years in uniform. He had broad shoulders, a weary posture, and a face marked by too many long nights, dark circles under gray-green eyes, a faint crease between his brows that never fully relaxed. His hair, once black, had begun to surrender to strands of silver at his temples, giving him an older, more solemn look than his age deserved. He wore a simple black suit instead of his usual sheriff's department jacket, but there was no mistaking his role in Cedarbrook. Damon had the steady, measured movements of someone who had learned that sudden gestures can escalate fear, and his voice, soft, low, usually calmed people before they even realized he was guiding them. Years ago, a case gone wrong in another town had left a young boy dead. A mistake Damon could never fully forgive himself for. That failure haunted him like a cold hand on the back of his neck, shaping the way he worked now, triple-checking reports, listening more than he spoke, trusting details that others overlooked. And above all, he trusted dogs like Kodiak, whose senses were not clouded by pride or exhaustion. The chapel was filled with people from every crease of Cedar Brook's small map: neighbors in heavy coats, hospital nurses in dark dresses, an elderly couple who ran the bakery, a group of officers from the sheriff's department lined up quietly along the aisle. Father Thomas Gallagher, the priest of St. Matthew's, moved gently among them. He was a man in his late 50s, short and a little round, with a face softened by laugh lines and a pair of kind brown eyes that always seemed on the edge of either smiling or weeping, depending on what was needed. His thick hair, now mostly white, curled slightly at the edges where it brushed his collar. Father Thomas was known in town as a man who believed in both miracles and medicine. He had spent his youth in city parishes where sirens and gunshots were the nightly chorus, and those years had burned away any taste for melodrama. He had learned that sometimes the holiest thing he could offer was simply presence. Today, though, even his presence felt small in the face of a child-sized coffin. He finished a brief prayer and stepped back, giving space for the mourners to come forward. A low murmur filled the chapel as people shifted, cleared throats, sniffled, into tissues. Snow tapped lightly against the stained glass panes, painting the pews with shifting patterns of blue and red. It should have been like any other winter funeral, a collection of sorrow, ritual words, a final hymn. Instead, there was Kodiak. From the moment they brought Emily's body into the chapel, Kodiak had refused to leave her side. He had arrived with Damon, tail low, steps hesitant, as if the floor itself might reject what was happening. When the coffin was set down, he circled it once, nose working furiously, then lay down tight against it with a low, uneasy whine nestled in his throat. A few of the townspeople thought it was touching. Some whispered that it was heartbreaking. One older woman, pressing a hand to her chest, murmured, "He knows she's gone. Poor thing." But Damon watched the dog's body with growing unease. This wasn't how Kodiak behaved at death. Damon had seen him at accident scenes, at crime scenes, at the quiet aftermath of violence where all that remained was the metallic smell of blood and the heavy silence of what couldn't be undone. When the dead were truly gone, Kodiak's posture changed. He became cautious, almost reverent, sniffing and then stepping back, as if acknowledging that his work had ended at the boundary he could not cross. He did not cling to bodies that no longer carried life. He did not tremble. He did not fight to stay. But here, beside Emily's coffin, Kodiak's breathing was shallow and fast. His paws flexed against the stone floor. Every now and then, his nose pressed urgently to the narrow edge where the lid met the base, as if he were trying to pour himself through that tiny gap. Twice already, when one of the ushers tried gently to coax him away so people could get closer, Kodiak had refused to move. He hadn't growled or snapped, but his body had become a solid wall of muscle and intent, his eyes fixed stubbornly on the small figure inside, something wild and desperate flickering in their amber depths. Damon stepped closer now, crouching beside the dog, his dress shoes creaking softly. He laid a hand on Kodiak's neck, feeling the thrumming tension under the fur. "Easy, boy," he murmured under his breath. "I know you loved her. I know." Kodiak's ear twitched toward his voice, acknowledging him, but his nose stayed pressed toward the coffin. And then Damon noticed it, the way the dog's nose kept shifting slightly, not just toward Emily, but toward some faint trace that seemed to drift, thread-like, through the air. Kodiak's nostrils flared, drawing in the scent again and again, as if worried he might lose it. This wasn't just grief. This was work. Damon's mind, trained by years of pattern and evidence, began to move in that quiet, dangerous way it did when something didn't fit. He thought of the paramedics' report at the scene. No pulse, no response, pupils unreactive. He thought of the freezing wind, the chaos, the snow swirling like torn paper through the air, the grim certainty in every professional voice that Emily was gone. He thought of how quickly everything had been decided, And yet, Kodiak, who accepted death when it was truly there, would not accept it now. The dog's entire being screamed that something was off, and Damon had learned long ago that ignoring a good dog's instincts was a fast road to regret. Father Thomas, noticing Damon's expression, stepped closer. His shoes whispered over the stone floor as he approached, the hem of his simple black cassock brushing against the tips of Kodiak's fur. "Is he all right, Sheriff?" the priest whispered. His voice carried the gentle weight of concern, not just for the dog, but for the fragile scene of grief that could so easily tip into panic. Damon rose slowly, one hand still resting lightly on Kodiak's back to keep the dog grounded. Up close, Father Thomas could see the sheriff's eyes were not the eyes of a man resigned to tragedy. They were sharp, awake, measuring something invisible. "He's not himself," Damon answered quietly. "Not the way I'd expect, given—" His gaze flicked to the coffin and back. He did not finish the sentence. Some truths felt wrong when spoken over a child's body. Father Thomas frowned, glancing down at Kodiak. The dog stared back, ears forward, eyes bright with an intensity that was almost unsettling. There was no slackness, no empty sorrow in that gaze. It was the look of a scout who had found something and was trying desperately to report back to his commander. "Grief touches creatures too," the priest said softly, though even as he spoke, he seemed unconvinced by his own words. Something in Kodiak's urgency made the hair rise slightly at the back of his neck. Damon leaned closer to the priest, lowering his voice until it was barely more than breath. "This isn't grief, Father," he said. "He's trying to tell us something. He's reacting to a scent he can't ignore." Father Thomas blinked, studying Damon's face. He had known the sheriff for years, had watched him hold this town together through storms, fights, and endless small collisions of human frailty. Damon was not a man given to dramatics or superstition. When he said something was wrong, he usually had a reason. "What kind of scent?" the priest whispered. Damon's jaw tightened. He glanced back at Sarah, hunched over in the pew, clutching a folded tissue in both hands as if it were the only thing keeping her from falling apart. He looked at the officers along the aisle, their hats held respectfully against their chests. He looked at Emily's still hands, at the faint trace of pink in her cheeks that could be the work of skilled mortuary cosmetics, or could be something else. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but Kodiak thinks there's more here than what we see." For a moment, silence thickened in the chapel. The soft crackle of the candles seemed louder. Outside, a gust of wind sent a flurry of snow against the windows, a pale shiver of white. The mourners shifted, unaware that anything had changed, believing they were still gathered for the same reason, to say farewell, to let go, to move forward into a colder version of their lives. Father Thomas's gaze drifted from Damon to Kodiak, and then to the small coffin. His hand, which had blessed countless graves, tightened around the worn leather of his prayer book. There were doctrines he believed, rules he followed, procedures he trusted. But he was also a man who had spent enough time at hospital bedsides to know that life and death did not always behave as neatly as they were recorded on forms. Sometimes something small, an eyelid twitch, a faint warmth in the skin, whispered of possibilities that everyone else had already buried. "What do you need from me?" he asked quietly. Damon exhaled, the breath steaming faintly in the chill of the chapel. "For now," he replied, "just time, and for you not to close this story too quickly." Father Thomas gave a small, grave nod. There, between the candles and the snow-blurred windows, an unspoken agreement passed between the sheriff and the priest. The service would continue, the prayers would be said, the people would mourn. But something had shifted, subtle and profound. The chapel was no longer simply a room where a town came to surrender a child to death. It had become something else, a threshold, a quiet place where doubt had been planted like a seed beneath the winter stone, waiting for its moment to break through. Damon rested his hand more firmly on Kodiak's back, feeling the dog's heartbeat hammering under his palm. "Easy, boy," he whispered again. "We hear you." He lifted his eyes to the altar, to the pale light spilling through the frosted glass. Cedarbrook believed it was witnessing a farewell. Damon knew better. Somewhere, hidden under layers of snow and sorrow, the first fragile threads of the truth were beginning to stir. And the old stone chapel, wrapped in winter's silence, was no longer just a house of mourning. It was the birthplace of a reckoning that had not yet found its voice. Winter in Cedarbrook had a way of erasing boundaries, snow-covered driveways until they blended with the streets, yards fading into alleys, paths becoming guesswork. But for Emily and Kodiak, winter was never a barrier. It was a playground. Their bond had not begun in warmth, but in frost. Not in sunlight, but beneath drifting flurries that turned the world white. Kodiak had first come into the Turner family's life when Emily was only 4. He was not originally hers. He had been newly assigned to the Cedarbrook Sheriff's Department. Back then, Kodiak had been younger, with a faster gait and sharper impatience, trained to seek, find, and track, not to babysit. But he had taken to Emily almost instantly, like a compass needle latching onto true north. On those early winter mornings before Sarah left for the hospital, Emily would sit on the back steps of their small 2-story home, wrapped in a pink puffer jacket with fur lining around the hood. Kodiak would sit beside her, more of a sentinel than a pet, his head nearly level with her shoulder when sitting, his breath steaming in the cold. Sometimes Emily would lean into him, burying her tiny gloved hands into his thick coat, giggling at the warmth he radiated. Emily had been a curious, whimsical child. She wasn't loud, nor reckless, nor wild. Instead, she possessed an almost old-soul quietness. Where other children shouted and sprinted, she observed and asked questions. "Do dogs smell color?" she once asked Damon, who stood sipping coffee from a thermos on a patrol shift, watching them from the yard. Damon had chuckled and replied, "Probably better. They smell memory." And Emily had believed that, truly, earnestly. With that simple faith children have before experience doubts everything. One particular memory was stamped into Damon's mind. A snowy evening a year earlier. Emily had intentionally hidden one of her mittens somewhere in the yard just to see if Kodiak could find it. Damon had watched from the porch, arms folded, amused as Emily proclaimed dramatically, "If I ever get lost, he will find me." Kodiak hadn't even hesitated. He'd trotted to the swing set, circled twice, dug through soft powder, and triumphantly retrieved the mitten, holding it in his jaws like an offering. Sarah had laughed, a rare, unguarded laugh that lit up her face like dawn. Those moments were the foundation, countless small threads weaving a bond that sat deeper than anyone assumed. Kodiak didn't just know Emily, he knew her. Her scent was part of his imprint of the world, in the same category as Damon's voice, or the smell of gun oil, or the scent of fresh snow, which brought Damon, in the present, to a slow-burning realization. Kodiak was not treating Emily as he had treated the dead. He was treating her as someone lost. As the service at the chapel ended, Damon gently guided Kodiak toward the exit. Snow had thickened outside, flakes descending, slow and soft like drifting ash. A few townsfolk approached Damon on their way to their cars, offering hushed condolences. "Terrible thing," murmured Evelyn Parson, a short round woman who ran the flower shop, her gray curls tucked beneath a wool hat. She had always liked Emily, slipping her spare blossoms on summer visits. "Yes," Damon said softly. Evelyn leaned forward, eyes watery but sharp. "Dogs grieve too, I've heard. Poor fellow must be heartbroken." Kodiak glanced up at her, but did not react. His nose worked the air, sifting, sorting, rejecting most scents, clinging to one. "Yes," Damon replied, though his thoughts drifted elsewhere. He looked down at Kodiak, who stared intently toward the road, where the hospital ambulance had once unloaded Emily. Not sentiment, not ritual. Search behavior. A few days before the accident, Damon had been at the Turner house for a routine welfare visit at Sarah's request. Emily had not been feeling well, dizzy, prone to faint spells, and Sarah had been overwhelmed. Damon had brought paperwork and a soft word, nothing more. But during that visit, Emily had insisted on showing him something, a small wooden box under her bed, painted clumsily. Inside were treasures, a smooth river stone, a faded ribbon, a plastic bracelet, and a drawing of Kodiak with 4 words written in shaky crayon. "He will find me." Damon had smiled and ruffled her hair, but something about it had stuck, like a whispered promise overheard by fate. In the house today, after leaving the chapel, Damon met Sarah again. She had returned home, refusing food, refusing warmth, moving through the house as if each object might break at her touch. Kodiak followed closely, not to comfort, but to investigate. "What is he looking for?" Sarah asked, voice ragged. Damon hesitated. He could have lied, said the dog was mourning. But Sarah Turner was not a woman who needed protective lies. She was a nurse. She had seen bodies revive and bodies expire. She respected truth, even when it left scars. "Sarah," Damon said slowly, "Kodiak thinks Emily isn't completely gone." Sarah stared at him, confusion first, then fury, then a bruised, broken hope that frightened her more than death itself. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't give me something to cling to. I'm not offering hope. I'm stating behavior. Kodiak recognizes her scent as living. There is something there." Sarah sank into a chair, eyes closing, tears forming, despite her attempt to suppress them. I don't know. Something was wrong," she whispered. "At the hospital. The room was so cold, but I thought I felt warmth in her palm, and I told myself it was imagination." Damon crouched next to her. "You're a medical professional. Your instincts matter." Sarah looked at Kodiak, who stood at the threshold of the kitchen, nose raised. "What does he smell?" she asked. "Truth," Damon answered. At that moment, a knock came on the door. Standing there were two men, Sergeant William Rowe, the man who had been driving the snow mini-sled that struck Emily, and Deputy Carla Jensen, a tall, athletic woman in her early 30s with a calm, analytical face and pale blonde hair pulled into a tight braid behind her neck. Carla had a reputation for being objective, level-headed, and meticulous, the last person to be swayed by emotion. "We need to sign the final incident forms," Rowe said awkwardly. His gaze slid away from Sarah. His posture was stiff, defensive. He was a solid man in his late 40s, with stocky shoulders and a trimmed beard. He had always been considered reliable, though never particularly imaginative. Carla nodded professionally. "We'll be quick." Kodiak stepped forward and sniffed Rowe's pant leg. Rowe flinched subtly, too subtly for most to notice. But Damon noticed. Kodiak then turned toward Carla, sniffed, and dismissed. Rowe, interest, Carla, nothing. Damon watched every muscle of Kodiak's face. Rowe cleared his throat. "He's probably just upset." Kodiak lingered, nose inches from Rowe's boot. Carla frowned. "That's odd. Damon, what's he doing?" Damon answered steadily. "Kodiak Catalog Scent Association. He's processing something." Rowe forced a chuckle. "Well, I'm not hiding a stake in my sock, that's for sure." Sarah stared at Rowe, her voice trembling. "You were there. You saw her. She was gone. You're sure?" Rowe looked at her, too quickly, too firmly. "Yes." There was no pulse. Carla glanced between them, uneasy, sensing what Damon sensed. Something off balance in Rowe's energy. Not guilt exactly, more like anticipation or fear of being found out. Kodiak withdrew then, sat beside Damon, and let out a soft, tense chuff. Damon made his decision. "Carla," he said quietly, "we're going to the hospital. I need access to the updated vitals from Emily's final scan." Carla blinked. "But the case is closed." "Not yet," Damon replied. Rose stepped forward. "Damon, let this go, for the family's sake." But Damon Hale did not let go. He had lost one child in his career due to assumption. He would not lose another due to haste. He looked Rowe in the eye and said a single sentence, one that made the sergeant pale. "I don't think we buried a dead girl." The Cedarbrook Community Hospital sat on the northern edge of town, its brick walls half buried under wind-sculpted snowbanks. At night, its roof lights glowed diffusely through the swirling flurries, haloed like distant stars. Damon, Kodiak, and Deputy Carla Jensen arrived just after dusk. The storm was thickening, snowflakes slanted sideways, stinging exposed skin like icy grains. But Kodiak pressed forward with purpose, tail straight, shoulders firm. Inside, the hospital corridors were quiet except for the hum of ventilation and the occasional squeak of rubber soles on linoleum. The fluorescent lights cast a clinical pallor over everything, flattening shadows and draining warmth. Here, there were no grieving guests, no hymns, no flowers. Just data, charts, and records. They were met at the reception desk by Nurse Daniel Metcalf. Daniel was in his late 20s, short and sturdy with a rounded face and sandy brown hair kept cropped neatly. He wore navy scrubs patterned with tiny white snowflakes and had a gentle, cautious disposition. In the hospital, he was known for being methodical, careful to a fault. He disliked improvisation and clung to routine like an anchor. "Sheriff Hale," he greeted softly. "Carla and Kodiak." He offered a small nod to the dog before lowering his voice. "You're here about Emily." Damon's voice was calm, steady. "We need access to her vitals, especially the thermal data from the last procedure and the ocular reflex logs." Daniel hesitated. He glanced toward the hallway leading to the pediatric wing. The final declaration was already signed by Dr. Lang. If I pull the stored copy, I'll need to log the request. "That's fine," Damon replied. "Log it." Daniel swallowed, then turned to the computer. Carla leaned slightly toward Damon. "Dr. Lang signed the death certificate?" "Yes," Damon murmured. "But I want to see how quickly it was signed, and whether all tests were completed." Kodiak stood beside them, nose active, shifting slightly from foot to foot. His senses were running along invisible threads, invisible to humans, yet concrete to him. As Daniel typed, Damon asked casually, "How long have you worked here?" 5 years, Daniel answered. "Started right after nursing school. I was actually working the night shift when Emily arrived." Damon watched his eyes closely. People often didn't lie with their voice. Lies pooled in the eyes, the mouth, the hands. "What did you observe?" Damon asked. Daniel's fingers paused on the keyboard. "She was brought in with hypothermic conditions, core temperature severely lowered, heartbeat absent by monitor, pupils fixed." He swallowed. "But?" Daniel exhaled slowly, a small cloud under the cold vent above. "But something felt different. I don't know how to explain it. I've seen sudden cardiac deaths. I've seen pediatric seizure collapse. It wasn't like those. Her skin temperature, it was low, yes, but not catastrophically low." Carla frowned. "Meaning?" Daniel turned to them fully now. "It was as if her body wasn't shutting down, but retreating. Like a bear going into hibernation. Not dying, just withdrawing." Damon's eyes sharpened. Kodiak gave a quiet exhale, almost like agreement. "And yet, Dr. Lang made the call," Damon said. Daniel nodded reluctantly. "Dr. Lang is very decisive. He doesn't like ambiguity." Dr. Lang, Damon knew him, tall, imposing, authoritative, nearly 60. A man with a rigid spine and rigid thinking. He was respected, yes, but revered mostly for certainty, not genius. He did not hesitate, even when he perhaps should. Kodiak shifted, nose up, sniffing the air, then suddenly padded down the hall toward the emergency intake doors. "Kodiak," Damon called softly. But the dog ignored him, tracing the lingering scent of panic, sweat, adrenaline, medical alcohol, dried blood. Emily's scent. Kodiak stopped at a set of double doors leading to the cold storage wing, the interim holding area where bodies were kept before transfer. He pressed his nose against the seam and whimpered, not mournfully, urgently. Damon caught up and knelt beside him. "You still smell life," he murmured. Kodak didn't look at him. He stared at the door. Daniel looked uneasy. "Sheriff, that area is restricted." "We're going in," Damon said. Carla stepped up. "I'll clear it." She swiped her badge, entered her code. The doors opened with a soft hiss. Inside, the air felt like a frozen exhale. Stainless steel walls, frosty vents, digital temperature readouts, and on a gurney beneath a white sheet, a child-sized form. Emily. Damon approached quietly, slowly, like approaching a sleeping creature, not a corpse. He folded back the sheet. There she was, face pale, lips soft, lashes laid on cheeks like seeds on snow. Daniel looked away, but Damon didn't. His eyes scanned every detail. A thin pulse vein at the throat, not totally collapsed. Skin tone, not waxy. Fingers, not stiff. And, just as he leaned close, a breath, almost non-existent but present. Daniel gasped. "That's impossible. She was declared—" "She wasn't dead," Damon said firmly. "She was in hypometabolic stasis." Kodiak pressed his nose to Emily's hand, and Emily's finger twitched. The door burst open. Dr. Richard Lang entered with controlled fury. He cut an impressive figure, tall, thin, but sharply defined in posture, with silver hair combed immaculately backward, and glasses that always seemed freshly polished. He was articulate, firm, and intolerant of contradiction. Years of being the unquestioned authority had carved arrogance into his bones. "What is the meaning of this?" Lang demanded. Damon turned. "You declared a living child dead." Lang stiffened. "Are you out of your mind? There were no vital signs, no responses, no ocular reflexes." "She was hypothermic," Damon interrupted. "You should have known low temperature can mask life signs." Lang shot back. "I have practiced medicine longer than you've been a sheriff. Do not lecture me on diagnostics." But Damon did not raise his voice. He simply asked, "Did you run a Doppler carotid flow test?" Lang blinked. That was all the answer needed. "You didn't," Damon said quietly. "You didn't test microvascular activity. You saw absence and assumed death." Lang pointed at the bed angrily. "That child underwent a severe collision. The probability of survival—" "Probability is not certainty," Damon countered. Kodiak gave a low growl, tiny but razor-edged. Lang stepped back slightly. Daniel spoke up timidly. "Dr. Lang, I did feel a trace of warmth when we transferred her." Lang spun. Silence. But Damon stepped between them. "No," he said. "Daniel did his job. Kodiak did his. I'm doing mine. You're the one who rushed closure." Now Lang's arrogance slipped, replaced by something flickering in his eyes. Fear. Because a wrongful death declaration wasn't just a mistake. It was malpractice. It could ruin him. Damon softening his tone, not to comfort Lang, but to focus the situation. "Right now, this isn't about blame. It's about saving Emily." Carla looked at Emily's faintly shifting chest. "She needs active rewarming, oxygenation, gentle stimulation, cardiac cueing." Daniel nodded eagerly. "We can begin neonatal warming protocols. We have the blanket units," Lang snapped. "I'll take over." "No," Damon said calmly. "You won't." Lang stared. "You had your chance." Damon turned to Daniel and Carla. "She's yours." And to Kodiak, softly. "Stay close." Within 20 minutes, Emily's small body was moved to a private recovery room, equipped with warmed oxygen, indirect heating pads, and circulation monitors. Her color improved by a shade. Her lips softened. Her eyelashes quivered faintly. Damon stood by the wall. Kodiak sat by her bedside. Carla and Daniel worked gently and efficiently. Lang hovered near the door, his jaw set, shoulders tight, watching his control slip away. Damon glanced at him. "We're not done. There's still one more question." Lang didn't answer. Damon stepped nearer, voice quiet. "How did Sergeant Rowe's boot end up with Emily's scent?" Lang froze, and Damon knew Lang was not the only one wrong here. There was more, much more. The night deepened over Cedar Brook, and the snowfall thickened until the world outside looked like it had been erased and redrawn in chalk. Inside the hospital room, the dim monitor lights flickered in soft pulses and traced out the fragile return of Emily's warmth. Kodiak refused to leave her bedside, his head resting near her small hand, eyes half closed yet alert. The posture of a guardian who slept only in slivers, if at all. Damon stood by the window, arms folded, gaze fixed on the stormlit valley. His thoughts churned with a detective's rhythm. Sergeant Rowe, Dr. Lang, Avery and the earlier chain of interactions, the accident scene, the snowmobile. Something about Rowe's reaction to Kodiak earlier had unsettled him. Not guilt over a tragic mistake, guilt with awareness. But tonight was not for confrontation. Tonight was for investigation. Carla entered quietly, carrying her thick department-issued parka and an extra jacket for Damon. "If you're planning to go out," she murmured, "you'll want this." Damon didn't turn. "And Kodiak." Carla looked at the dog. "He's not going to leave her." Damon finally faced her, voice low. "He will if she tells him to." Carla frowned. "She's unconscious." "You don't need words for that," Damon said. "Not between them." Indeed, as if sensing the shift in Damon's stance, Kodiak lifted his head. He pressed his nose gently to Emily's wrist. Then, he looked at Damon. It was enough. Damon slipped on his jacket. Kodiak rose immediately to his feet, silent as snowfall. Carla grabbed her gloves and radio. Daniel remained behind to monitor Emily's vitals. Dr. Lang, after a terse conversation with the hospital director, had retreated to an office surrounded by medical texts and denial. Sarah Turner, exhausted, emotionally weather-beaten, sat in the room's corner chair. She didn't stop Damon. She simply whispered, "Bring her back." Damon nodded once. "We will." The storm outside was brutal. Wind howled between parked cars like an animal searching for entry. Damon walked steadily, Kodiak glued to his left side, Carla to his right. Their boots crunched through thick snow. As they stepped into the silent back lot behind the hospital, Carla asked, "Where are we starting?" Damon's breath floated in the cold, ghost-like. At the last point, Kodiak recognized her scent outdoors. The accident site. Kodiak's ears pricked, memory triggered. They reached Damon's patrol truck and piled in. Kodiak sat on the back seat, nose pressed to the window. The roads were nearly invisible, buried beneath layers of snow. Damon drove slowly, headlights clawing through white darkness. When they reached the trailhead near the edge of Cedar Brook's frozen marshland, Damon killed the engine. The world outside felt suspended, wind swirling, trees creaking, moon obscured. Kodiak leapt out first, sniffed the air, then the ground. Then he began to walk, not randomly, purposefully. Carla followed, flashlight beam bouncing over snowdrifts. Damon came behind. Their breaths came out in heavy white clouds. Kodiak moved like a creature half wild and half trained, part instinct, part discipline. His stride slowed at one particular patch of trampled snow. Carla crouched. This was where the collision occurred. Tracks, compressed snow, the shape of snowmobile runners, scattered footprints. Damon's gaze swept the area. Emily's body would have landed somewhere around here. Kodiak suddenly veered left, toward the tree line. "He's not following her scent from the moment she was lying still," Damon murmured. "He's following her scent mid-motion." Carla blinked. "Movement?" Damon nodded. "She wasn't still immediately. She may have been picked up." Carla's eyes widened. "Are you suggesting—" Before she could finish, Kodiak stopped beside something half buried in snow. Damon knelt, brushed aside the frost. A woolen mitten. Purple, child-sized. Kodiak pawed beside it, finding a faint trail of disturbed snow leading deeper into the woods. On either side of the trail, the snow was pristine. Only this narrow corridor was broken. "Someone carried her," Damon said, "away from the crash site." Carla frowned deeply. "Rose said Emily died instantly." "He said she had no pulse," Damon corrected. "He said he panicked, that he rushed her to the hospital." "But he didn't take this path," Carla said. "He drove straight to the main road." Damon looked toward the woods. "So someone else was here." Kodiak pressed forward, deeper into darkness. The forest was a cathedral of skeletal branches, snow-laden limbs arching over the path. Kodiak kept low to the ground, nostrils flaring, taking in each layer of scent. Animals, pine sap, exhaust fumes, wool fibers, frost. And beneath all of it, Emily. Every now and then, he would emit a short, clipped huff, the canine equivalent of a signal. Here, still here. After 20 minutes, they arrived at a clearing. Old tool shed, half collapsed, rusted metal roof, snow piled nearly to the eaves. Carla shivered from more than cold. This belongs to the police department, the old response shed. They used it years ago. Damon's eyes narrowed. I know. Kodiak ran to the wooden door, pushed his nose into the crack under it, and whined. Carla stepped forward, unholstered a small flashlight, and pushed the door open. Inside, stale air, dusty, cold. Tools hung on pegs, a workbench, torn tarp, and on a chair, folded, a small backpack, pink, with a unicorn patch, Emily's. Kodiak shoved his nose into it, inhaling sharply, muscles quivering. Damon lifted the bag carefully. Inside were a tiny hairbrush, crayons, a folded napkin with a scribbled heart, and a scarf, wool, teal-colored, not Emily's. Kodiak stiffened, nose hovering over the scarf. Growl, low, emergent. Carla asked softly, "Whose scent is that?" Damon didn't speak. He extended the scarf slowly toward Kodiak. Kodiak sniffed, paused, then stepped back. As if the smell struck something visceral, Carla's brow furrowed. "What is it?" Damon's voice was heavy steel. "Avery." Carla's head snapped toward him. "The assistant chief?" Damon nodded. Kodiak reacted to his scent the same way earlier. "At the chapel." Carla whispered. But Avery wasn't supposed to be at the crash site. The snow outside moaned as the wind surged. Damon spoke slowly, painfully. Unless the crash wasn't accidental, and Avery was already there. Kodiak pressed against Damon's leg, seeking direction. Damon lowered his voice. "Find!" Kodiak bolted out of the shed, nose to ground. They followed him through the trees. Kodiak tracked the scent to a wide curve in the woods, where the fresh snow ended and ice began. This was a frozen section of the creek, edges lined with thick reeds and brittle stalks. Kodiak nose lowered, tracing every particle. Near the creek's midpoint, he halted. Lights from the town barely reached here. Damon used his flashlight. Footprints, 2 sets. One heavy, an adult male, one lighter, boots small enough to be a child's. But the strides, the child's print, overlapped the adult's. Carla knelt. He carried her part way. But here, Damon nodded grimly. He set her down. She stood. Carla's voice grew tight. Emily was walking. Barely, Damon said. Maybe semi-conscious, but alive. A cold realization swept through them, colder than the snow. She had walked. She had tried to move, and someone had guided her. Kodiak moved again, following that faint chemical signature that was uniquely Emily, past the creek, up a ridge, through a ravine, until they reached a point where the trail simply stopped. Kodiak circled, confused. He sniffed the air, barked once, sharp, frustrated. Carla asked, "What's wrong?" Damon's eyes scanned upward. What if the scent didn't stop? Carla exhaled. Snowfall erased the trail? No, Damon said slowly. He pointed, tracks leading toward a tire mark covered partially by fresh snow. A vehicle, not the snowmobile, had met them there. Damon's voice hardened. Avery drove out here. He took her. Why? Carla whispered. Damon stared into the storm-whitened dark. That's what we're going to find out. Kodiak lifted his head and howled, not to mourn, but to mark. The forest absorbed the sound, and for a single shivering moment, Cedarbrook held its breath beneath the winter sky. The interrogation room at Cedarbrook Sheriff's Department was not dramatic. No mirrored glass, no harsh spotlight. Just a plain square space with white walls, a metal table, 2 chairs, and the slow hum of a ceiling vent. Yet tonight, it felt like the room itself was listening. Avery sat across from Damon, hands folded neatly on the table. He was in his early 50s, tall with graying hair combed back too perfectly, skin pale but unlined, giving him a strangely ageless appearance. His posture was elegant, almost aristocratic, with the calm air of someone used to control. In Cedarbrook, he had a reputation for being composed, civil, intellectually sharp, and politically calculating. He had risen through the department not from brute force or heroics, but from public trust and administrative finesse. People liked him, Or at least, they found no reason to dislike him. Avery was the type of man who rarely raised his voice and never raised suspicion. Tonight, however, his composure met friction. Damon sat down opposite him, placing a small folder on the table. Carla stood near the wall, arms crossed, watching with analytical stillness. Kodiak lay by Damon's chair, silent, alert, eyes fixed on Avery. The dog's presence seemed to erode the shield of calm around Avery, grain by grain. Damon started with something deceptively soft. "Robert, how long have you served this community?" Avery smiled gently, the politician smile. 23 years on the force. Before that, 5 years in private security. I've given my life to this town. "And to its people?" Damon asked. Avery's smile didn't waver. "Of course." Damon leaned forward slightly. "Including Emily Turner?" For the first time, Avery blinked, slowly. "I told you at the chapel. I didn't know the girl." Damon didn't respond with words. He opened the folder and slid across a printed still frame, an image from a neighbor's doorbell camera. It showed Emily near her home a week before the accident, walking with Kodiak on a leash. In the same frame, not close, but present, Avery was stepping out of a parked car watching them. The timestamp and GPS data were printed beneath. Avery glanced at it briefly, not surprised, just inconvenienced. "Coincidence," he said calmly. "I was visiting a donor 2 houses down." "Coincidence," Damon repeated quietly. "Yes." Carla spoke then. "Let's move forward. During the accident, where were you exactly?" Avery answered without hesitation, voice smooth as polished glass. "At the station, reviewing winter operations and resource scheduling. Sergeant Rowe had the snowmobile for patrol. I wasn't even on the road." Damon slid another paper forward, GPS tracking logs retrieved earlier that night. "Your patrol SUV pinged at 5:42 p.m. on the North Marsh Road, near the crash site." Avery's eyes narrowed, slightly, like a cat's pupils, contracting, but his voice remained steady. "I took a short drive to review some of the emergency route conditions after snowfall." "Without logging the patrol," Carla said. Avery shrugged. "I wasn't on duty. The vehicle was available." Damon tapped the table. "Did you see Emily?" "No," Avery replied. "Did you see Rowe?" "No." Kodiak let out a soft, rolling growl, low, deep, almost inaudible. Avery's eyes flicked downward. Damon leaned forward. "You know how Kodiak works. He doesn't react to uncertainty, only detection. He knows whether a scent is familiar and recent." "I'm not answering to a dog," Avery said sharply, sudden steel in his tone. "You already are," Damon replied, "because that dog is the only witness who doesn't lie." Carla stepped closer to Damon's shoulder and quietly placed another piece of evidence on the table, the teal wool scarf recovered from the shed. Avery's gaze flicked to it, then away, carefully blank. Damon lifted it slightly. "This was with Emily's backpack." Avery spoke evenly. "Anyone could have left that there." "Kodiak didn't react to anyone," Damon countered. "He reacted to you, strongly." Avery took a slow breath. "Sheriff, I understand you're under pressure. I understand this case is emotional. But let me be very clear. I have nothing to do with this tragedy." It was a smooth line, too smooth. Damon changed approach. "Robert, do you believe Emily died at the crash site?" Avery hesitated, just a fraction. Then, "Yes, that was the determination made by medical professionals." "And if I told you she didn't?" Damon asked. Avery's face remained calm, but his fingers pressed slightly tighter together. Carla spoke softly. "If I told you she is breathing again?" Avery's expression didn't change, but something flashed behind his eyes. Not surprise, strategy recalculation. He didn't know that. He didn't expect that. Damon nodded slowly. "Ah." Avery blinked. "Ah, what?" "You didn't know she survived," Damon said softly. Avery's jaw tightened. "She didn't." Damon stood and began pacing slowly, not angrily, but deliberately. "You arrived at the crash site. Emily was unconscious, severely hypothermic. Rowe did not check for subtle life signs. He panicked. He was following orders. Yours. You instructed him to clear the scene fast. Avery stiffened. No. Kodiak rose to his feet, silent, eyes sharp. You took Emily, Damon continued. You carried her into the woods. Instead of taking her to help, you hid her. Why? Avery remained stone-faced. You're fabricating. Carla spoke now, her voice crisp and clean like a scalpel. We found footprints. Emily walked beside you, weak but alive. You couldn't carry her the whole way, but you guided her. Avery's breathing changed, shallow, irregular. Damon softened his voice, dangerously gentle. You didn't kill her, Robert, but you were willing for everyone to believe she was dead. Avery finally broke posture, leaning back, gaze dropping. Why? Damon repeated. Tell me why. Minutes passed in silence, punctuated only by the hum of the ventilation. Then Avery spoke, voice low. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Damon's jaw tightened. Go on. Avery stared at the metal tabletop. Ro was supposed to get the mother's attention, nothing more. Intimidate her, shake her, make her withdraw a complaint. Carla stiffened. Complaint about what? Avery exhaled. Department budget misallocation. I redirected funds from maintenance into special operations training. Unapproved. Carla's eyes widened. You cut winter safety gear purchases. Avery nodded numbly. And she, Sarah, had found out. She threatened to escalate the complaint to the state board. Damon's eyes burned. So you used Ro to scare her. Avery's voice cracked. But the girl ran into the path, and Ro, he didn't see her. He pressed hands to his face. And I panicked. If the complaint was filed then, with Emily injured, it would have ended my career, my reputation. Carla stared. So you tried to hide her condition. Avery's voice was hollow. If she died, there would be no testimony, no investigation, just grief. Kodiak growled, louder this time. Avery flinched. Damon leaned forward. You chose career over a child's life. Avery whispered, I thought she was dying anyway. I thought it was mercy. Damon's voice turned into polished iron. And when she didn't die, you left her in the woods anyway. Avery looked shattered. Yes. Silence. Kodiak stepped forward, gaze locked on Avery. Damon didn't stop him. The dog approached slowly, not to threaten, but to judge. Avery met Kodiak's eyes, and for the first time, truly, he trembled. Damon finally spoke. Robert Avery, you are under arrest. Carla moved behind Avery, handcuffs ready. Avery didn't resist. He only whispered, I just wanted to be remembered. I couldn't bear losing everything I built. Damon's voice was quiet, final. You will be remembered, just not the way you intended. Kodiak exhaled, a quiet, heavy sound, as if releasing tension he had carried like a burden. The truth finally had crossed air and become solid, and outside, in the deep winter night, the snow continued to fall, not gently, but with the weight of judgment. Morning arrived slowly over Cedar Brook, as if the sky itself were uncertain whether to reveal the day. The snowfall had finally eased, and the first thin rays of winter sunlight pierced the clouds, tinting the hospital windows with pale gold. Inside the recovery room, the air felt warmer, softer. Machines hummed with steady rhythms, oxygen flow, neural cueing, thermal regulation, a quiet orchestra of medicine. Emily Turner lay in the center of it, cradled in heated blankets, her cheeks touched with the faintest blush of returning color. She didn't look like a child suspended between worlds anymore. She looked like a child asleep, safe, fragile, waiting. Sarah Turner sat at her bedside, posture bent, hands gently cupping Emily's left hand. But, unlike before, there was light in her eyes now. Fear remained, yes, but braided now with something she hadn't dared feel in days. Hope. Nurse Daniel Metcalf hovered by the monitors, reading vital stats with quiet reverence. He had changed since last night, as if witnessing the impossible had infused him with purpose. His eyes were brighter, his hands steadier. He checked the thermal gradient sensor and whispered, mostly to himself, core temperature rising, muscle tone returning. Damon Hale stood beside the foot of the bed. He was unshaven, exhausted, rumpled, but alert. Beneath the fatigue was relief, the bone-deep relief of a man who gambled everything on instinct and won. Kodiak lay on the floor near the bed, but not like last time. No tension, no agitation, no fear. He lay in peaceful alertness, tail resting, eyes half-lidded, ears relaxed. He kept occasional watch on Emily's breathing, but the urgency was gone. He had done his job. Now he waited for her to come back to him. Deputy Carla Jensen entered quietly, carrying a cup of coffee for Damon and a cup of tea for Sarah. She spoke softly to avoid disturbing Emily. Avery's been transferred to county detention. Rowe is cooperating. He's admitted involvement. The State Department has already been notified. They're sending investigators. Damon nodded. And Dr. Lang? Carla exhaled. He's still in administrative isolation, refusing to speak, refusing counsel. I think the realization that he declared a living girl dead finally broke him. Damon sighed, not vindictively, but with sorrow. He wasn't evil, Damon said quietly. Just arrogant, and sometimes that's enough. Sarah looked up at him, voice rough. Will he lose his license? Damon answered honestly. Probably, but that's not our concern right now. Sarah looked at her daughter again. No, it isn't. Time passed in quiet increments, heartbeat by heartbeat, minute by minute. At some point, Damon leaned over Sarah. I'm going to check in with the station and file our preliminary report. I'll be right outside if anything happens. Sarah nodded, grateful, weary. As Damon stepped into the hallway, Kodiak lifted his head. Damon paused. You staying? He asked. Kodiak pressed his chin back to the floor. Damon smiled. Good boy. Hours later, near midday, something changed. Emily's fingers moved. Not random twitching this time. Purposeful, slow, but hers. Sarah gasped. Emily? Daniel leaned over, eyes wide. We're getting voluntary motor response. She's waking up. Slowly, Emily's lashes fluttered. Her lips parted, drawing in a deeper breath. Then, her eyes opened. Not fully, just a sliver, enough to reveal a faint shimmer of blue beneath. Sarah sobbed, covering her mouth. Baby, I'm here. Kodiak stood immediately, ears forward, tail lifted. Emily blinked twice. Her gaze drifted, unfocused, then steadied. Her eyes found Kodiak first. Because of course they did. Her small lips moved, a whisper, barely sound. Kodiak stepped forward, silent, gentle, like a shadow of comfort. Emily reached out, her arm weak, trembling, but reaching. Kodiak placed his head under her hand. Emily's fingers curled into his fur. Sarah broke into tears, loud, relieved, cathartic. Daniel turned away, wiping his eyes. Carla slipped her hand over her chest, exhaling a shaky breath. Damon re-entered the room just in time to hear Emily's voice, faint but real. You stayed? Damon closed his eyes briefly, as if sealing that moment inside him. When he opened them again, the entire room seemed brighter. Emily swallowed softly, voice fragile. I got lost. Sarah shook her head gently. No, baby, you weren't lost. Kodiak found you. Emily blinked slowly. I was scared. Sarah stroked her hair. I know. Emily shifted her gaze, finding Damon. You heard him? Damon stepped forward gently. No, I listened. Kodiak heard you. Emily managed a tiny smile, barely more than a curve of her lips. He always finds me. In the hours that followed, Emily remained semi-alert but stable. Doctors began standard rewarming protocols to accelerate full motor recovery. Her neurological responses were strong, cognitive signs promising. Kodiak eventually settled beside the bed fully, head on pause, eyes never leaving her. There came a moment where Damon and Carla stepped outside into the crisp winter air. The storm had passed. The sky above Cedar Brook was clear. a radiant, icy blue. The snowfields glittered beneath the sunlight. The town itself seemed to exhale. Carla crossed her arms. You know, if Kodiak hadn't reacted the way he did, if you hadn't trusted him, we would have buried her. Damon nodded slowly. Sometimes, machines miss what instinct catches. Carla looked at him. Do you ever think about that boy? The one from years ago? Damon didn't answer immediately. His eyes drifted toward the horizon. Then he murmured, I think, today, I finally laid him to rest. Carla nodded, understanding. Later that evening, Damon returned to Emily's room. The blinds were half open, letting in the sunset, a soft wash of pale orange and rose over the snowy landscape. Emily slept peacefully now, a natural sleep. Sarah stood by the window. She turned to him. What happens next? Damon answered gently. There will be investigations, court proceedings, depositions. Sarah nodded. And Emily? Damon looked at the sleeping girl. She'll get better. Sarah looked at Kodiak. Because of him. Damon nodded. Yes. Sarah spoke softly, with reverence. Kodiak isn't just a dog. No, Damon said. He's evidence of something we forget sometimes. That love can be precise, and loyalty can be scientific, and instinct can be right. Sarah smiled, tired but grateful. Damon gave one final glance at the child sleeping beneath the winter sun. Then he whispered, mostly to himself, she wasn't dying, she was waiting. And with that, the long, cold shadow of uncertainty finally lifted. In the quiet ending of this story, we are reminded that God's miracles do not always arrive with thunder or bright angels. Sometimes they come through the loyalty of a dog who refuses to give up, through the courage of a man who chooses compassion, through the hope of a child who fights her way back to the light. In our everyday lives, we face storms too, moments of fear, uncertainty, and loneliness. But God walks beside us even then, guiding our steps, protecting our families, and sending help in ways we often only recognize afterward. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need encouragement. Today, leave a comment to tell us your thoughts and type Amen. If you believe in the quiet miracles, He still works. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing you stories of faith, love, and hope. May God bless you and your loved ones with peace and protection. And may you always feel His presence in your life,